Death Stranding is an okay, interesting game in its own right, but actually trying to sit down and play it leaves me with such an intense sense of longing for Kojima's past work. A phantom pain, if you would, because Death Stranding is so tantalizingly close to Metal Gear Solid 5, but it's not. Kojima spent a long time working on the engine for Metal Gear Solid 5, the Fox engine, and it was genuinely some seriously next-gen stuff, before leaving the company because of internal drama. Like any good supervillain, he named the company that he split to after himself, where he was gifted the Decima engine by the Horizon Zero Dawn people. Not legally, speaking as a tool with too much time, I think what they claim is the Decima engine is extremely blatantly a stolen and iterated version of the Fox engine made for MGS5. When I am playing Death Stranding, I can see Phantom Pain leftovers everywhere, to a point where it is actually distracting. Getting into a vehicle in Phantom Pain is weirdly distinctive, and it serves as a good first example. It swaps to a unique camera angle and plays a little cutscene. No other game I've played ever has done this, except for Death Stranding, which is the exact same minus the music sting. That goes for everything else I'm about to show. I have only ever seen these in Death Stranding and Phantom Pain. I want to start with an example that's very boring but very specific. It's the reason that tipped me off to there being something fishy about these two games' similarities. In both games, you get periodic info updates from the server in batches as you go through loading checkpoints which read from the same side of the screen in the exact same way. These specifically read out when you are traveling and you hit a loading checkpoint, and you can check it's always the same places every time. In MGS5, you are being updated about Mother Base and your R&D, and in Death Stranding, it's your likes. Combat-wise, there's the same crosshair that's sort of tied to the environment that shows when you'll hit cover instead of the target. The actual crosshair designs too are similar. They change with pretty much every single weapon, but they are consistently very angular and with very few curved lines. The vehicle physics are wrong in the same way. They lack weight. It feels like the vehicles are made of like rubber, and anytime the tires make contact with the surface, the vehicle will rocket forward even if this is coming out of like a free fall. If you look at these two clips back to back, you'll see what I mean. Even coming out of a nosedive, the Metal Gear Jeep rockets forward as soon as its tires get any purchase, and also coming out of a nosedive on a rocky hillside, the Death Stranding truck does the exact same thing as soon as its tires touch the ground. There are more subtleties about these vehicles that feel familiar too, but this video is long enough, and in truth, I don't know if I could articulate it very well. The lighting looks extremely similar. It's hard to put into words, but characters don't seem to cast shadows onto themselves, only from the environment, which makes them look weirdly flat when they move around. Metal Gear is the same way. Characters don't cast shadows onto themselves, but the environment has very sharp shadows to compensate. When you go into first-person mode, you can still walk around, and the movement system changes completely, better accommodating the first-person movement, but still feeling like weirdly sluggish. You go into this mode all the time in Metal Gear because it makes your weapons more accurate, and almost never in Death Stranding because it's used exclusively for looking at markers. In both games, you frequently visit a space that is always the same, which lets you slowly pan the camera around an environment which gradually gets more things added to it as you play. You even still keep all of the bloodstains on you from when you were just out, which can be removed via shower. In Metal Gear, that shower is a helicopter ride away, but thankfully in Death Stranding it's just right there in the totally not ACC, with complimentary Norman Reedus ogling scenes, right next to the Monster Energy. The private room is a clear evolution of the ACC. I don't want to act like they just copied their own work, as there are actual interactable elements to it, but it is still clearly built on the boss's helicopter rides. This one is far too specific not to bring up. There's a set of 5 main materials which you can pick up in missions from containers of various sizes. In MGS5, they're big cargo containers and then small boxes, and in Death Stranding, they are everywhere. It makes me wonder who was bothering to litter so extensively throughout America while still having the decency to keep it in solid airtight containers, though in truth that's not all of the resources. Venom does also find all kinds of medicinal plants as well, but Norman does have an equivalent. They just got simplified down to one resource, which is chiral crystals. It is weirdly specific that both of these games have 5 sets of resources, all shrunk down to easily understandable icons which are used to craft various things in a menu where the icons for what to craft are suspiciously similar in the size and layout that I had to bring it up. I need to clarify that this is all speculation, but these are an unbelievable amount of similarities in really minor ways that make me feel very adamantly that Death Stranding had to have been built on the bones of Phantom Pain and then iterated on significantly. I'm not trying to get Kojima in legal trouble or anything, but this whole situation is making me go insane. It is so clearly based on what we've seen in the Fox engine, and I've never seen anyone comment on this before. Did Kojima Productions steal a Fox engine, port what they could to Decima, and then work from there? Claiming that they straight up didn't use Decima at all doesn't sit right with me, because I don't know why they would rope another company into this if their master plan was just to not use it at all. If someone with more technical knowledge than me can explain why there are so many similarities despite them being on ostensibly different engines, I would love to know, and I will pin your comment. The reason that I brought all this up is because when I am playing Death Stranding, these similarities are in my face all the time. It wouldn't bother me usually, except Death Stranding is... how do I say that? It's not very good. The game, it's not good. And that's while Metal Gear Solid 5 is very easily on the best games of all time list for me. It was extremely innovative, it looks amazing, it runs great, it's got several incredibly memorable story moments, and a good ending twist that was all very well foreshadowed. Death Stranding has a terrible story, and okay gameplay sandbox which doesn't give you a reason to use half of it. Kojima is very good at that, admittedly, MGS5 does have a similar problem, but Death Stranding is so trivially easy that it really undermines the whole experience, and its story is definitely not doing it any favors. I know even today, lots of people don't know what the story is about, and I don't blame you because it's barely about anything at all, where there are unbelievably large stretches of practically nothing happening which is only tangentially related to gameplay. Death Stranding's characters are all just... there to be called in whenever there hasn't been a set piece in long enough. Miller and Ocelot felt like advisors, people who were with you on your journey to expand Mother Base and Outer Heaven, but Fragile is just someone who is there sometimes. The Metal Gear series is infamous for its poor pacing, and even though it's a Metal Gear game, bar the opening, 5 is unique in that it's pretty much completely devoid of bad pacing. There's no unreasonably long cutscenes, and the story progresses in a very natural way which integrates the gameplay constantly with reveals every few missions that lead to a grander mystery. Most impressively to me, it's digestible without having played any other Metal Gear game whatsoever, which is an achievement and a half given how convoluted it can be. To Death Stranding's credit, there aren't any hour-long Metal Gear cutscenes, but unfortunately, nothing happens in the cutscenes that we do have. I've got two main complaints about this: the camera and the action, or lack thereof. In a Metal Gear cutscene, the camera is like an active participant and its own character. It is far from static, it's revealing stuff separately from where the characters see them, it highlights objects in the scene with lens flare showing you where to look, and the camera is flying all over the damn place, oftentimes showing different perspectives in a way that a real camera just cannot do. And it's zooming in and trying to mimic how your eyes look and focus on things. Death Stranding, it's like the cinematographer died. This is basically like a step above shot reverse shot, and it's so much worse to a degree that kind of baffles me. I don't understand how we went from Metal Gear cutscenes that look like this
Now!
to a Death Stranding cutscene that is like this. The camera aside, nothing is fucking happening in these cutscenes. Almost half of all of the cutscenes in Death Stranding are characters in this identical copy-paste room talking to each other with that lovely stilted Kojima dialogue that I had to turn to the Russian dub so that I would not go insane listening to it.
Может, ты заткнешься?
Back to Metal Gear. When Venom does something wonderfully stupid and brings back an incredibly dangerous enemy asset to base, shits on lockdown, his greatest allies have ordered his men to basically perform treason because the boss is being an idiot. On Mother Base, you see CQC in literally every other cutscene. Sometimes it's on your own men, sometimes it's on children, and also the occasional naked woman. Welcome back to those who are tabbed out. Back in Death Stranding, they've got really engaging scenes too. What feels like pretty much every other cutscene has a long, lingering shot on Normus Reedus' face, where he doesn't fucking say or do anything. The foils, the side characters, are much worse as well. In Metal Gear, Miller is an insanely good character, with an emotional edge that makes him serve as a good audience surrogate, as well as being awesome with his one arm. The antagonist Skullface looks ridiculous, but is actually doing stuff in the plot trying to undermine your operations, with his own ideology and beliefs which he is actively trying to facilitate. Death Stranding's antagonist Higgs is a nothing. He's a nothing. He does nothing, and is nothing, and doesn't ever say anything of note. I can't fucking believe they turned him into the Joker. I get that the tone of these games is not supposed to be the same. One is a dramatic action thriller and the other is Death Stranding, but walking from place to place is unironically more exciting and enjoyable than the cutscenes, which is the exact opposite of how it probably should be when the world that they crafted is this bizarre. When I head back to Mother Base and get surprised with a cutscene, I'm always giddy to see what happens even if I've seen it before, because things actually happen.
Nice work today, boss!
Welcome back, boss. Another successful mission. Great to see you safe, boss. Snake, you stink.
But in Death Stranding, they were chores that I had to endure after having fun traversing the wilderness. I cannot understate how much of this is because of Norman Reedus. This dude is maybe the most boring character ever crafted. He reacts to things going on around him, sometimes truly horrific, mind-bending things with less urgency than I have when I need to go piss in the morning. He just kinda stands around while getting talked at like the dude is role-playing a phone booth. Boss also just kinda stood around getting talked at sometimes, but because you actually saw him do stuff occasionally, his presence in cutscenes feels more like a looming, calculating danger, as opposed to how Norman Reedus feels more like someone who is in the stands at a football game. This sounds incredibly inflammatory so far, so I want to sidebar for a second. Lots of people dismiss Death Stranding as a walking sim, and I am not doing that, even if the term is extremely applicable to the game in a non-derogatory way. I actually really enjoyed the delivery aspect. I did like playing Death Stranding when I was actually playing it. I didn't realize until writing this how deeply and truly I disliked the everything else. It's not even, like, objectively bad. I'm sure you can find enjoyment in the weird world of Death Stranding, but I gotta admit, I like things actually happening in the stories that I consume and also write. I wouldn't go as far to say that Death Stranding doesn't have a story, but it certainly doesn't have an engaging one. If you'll allow me to actually be inflammatory for a second, I understand now why in the lead up to this game's release, the cast and development team were like, I have no idea what this game is, because nothing happens in it. As for the actual gameplay, Death Stranding is also very disappointing for me because the traversal never actually poses a challenge. It's way too easy. You might say that walking is easy, how could it be difficult, but like, have you gone hiking? It is extremely fun. You're making choices about where to put your feet and where you're going to walk next, where you're going to have to take a break to catch your breath. Death Stranding could have been like that, but terrain is just labeled good, okay, and bad, and as long as you steer towards the blue, you'll literally never have a problem. The system could work if there were times where you were forced to take a path that wasn't blue, maybe the scanner lies to you sometimes, but there is no time in the entire game where this situation exists. You were never forced to actually use a ladder or any other traversal tools, and often using them is actively a waste of time, because if you just look like 3 feet to the left, there will be a perfectly safe path to use instead. I've seen the environments of the sequel, and I'm a little appalled that they made it several orders of magnitude more flat. That's the exact opposite of what I think they should have done. This does a good job undermining the themes, too. There's no reason to build connections if you don't need them. The whole thing where you build buildings so they could potentially help other people, practically every player building I've ever seen is just there for the hell of it. There's no actual need to build any of these things for other people because they don't need them. At best, it saves you like 3 seconds of fording a river. Outside pressures could have forced you to not take the most optimal, boring route, and so I would have loved to see more environmental dangers like the timefall rain and whiteout that's in 1. This exact thing was advertised in 2, with a mountain slide and a forest fire, but as far as I know, these are literally just trailer moments and don't actually happen dynamically. This means that it's practically impossible to fail a delivery unless you're an idiot, especially because of container repair spray. Even if you catastrophically fuck up, just whip out the old WD-40 and go crazy on your boxes back there. Look, he doesn't even have to aim, he just fucking sprays that shit wild, and it'll all be back to normal. Even if missions were all scripted, that could theoretically be okay. The missions in MGS5 have unexpected things happen in them constantly, and those are all scripted moments, but they feel dynamic because of the natural way that they are introduced. Your support characters call you up in the middle of a mission, they tell you that they've gotten reports that some part of the mission has been twisted in some way, from surprise reinforcements to the prisoner that you meant to extract just extracting themselves, freeing themselves, and then crashing in the wilderness. Those don't just happen off-screen either. If you're fast enough, you can literally see it happen with your own eyes. The prisoner in question is built different enough to just break their own cuffs somehow, proceeds to escape on their own by getting in a truck, then drives off and barely a minute later crashes it. But unfortunately, Death Stranding's missions are pretty much completely devoid of this. Deliveries from place to place are played very straight. You know, there is something that could have potentially saved all of these systems as is, which is scarcity. If scarcity was a problem, which narratively it would make a lot of sense to be given that America is entirely disconnected, instead it's identical to the Phantom Pain, where you get so many resources practically instantly and everything barely costs any resources to make, so there's no reason not to have everything you could possibly need on you at all times. I think this does a good job highlighting another reason that I think Norman makes a shitty protagonist. The dude is postured like he's the savior of humanity, when the average Canadian could probably be doing his job. He's not really a professional like the boss. The whole reason he's selected to carry around his funny necklace and deliver pizzas is because he's special, in a way that is extremely context-heavy and mainly seems like an excuse to let you piss on BTs as a combat option. Having a protagonist be a normal dude isn't the problem. If anything, Norman isn't really a normal dude. Norman dude. Anyway, it's how he barely reacts to anything. He's like the savior of America with the plot device condition, and he barely wrestles with any of that. This dude goes through like the most horrific life experiences of all time, and literally has nothing to say about being warped back to World War II and seeing spirits fight each other endlessly for presumably hundreds of years, only to single-handedly take down a special forces expert and his army loaned by Mr. Bones. I'd be really interested to see what a normal person would say about being transported to that situation, but apparently, Redis would be completely stone-faced stoic because he's a badass. Admittedly, I am going to be very biased against these sections because there's really no polite way to put it, is there? The combat is awful. Sorry that sounds blunt, but it is terrible. There are a handful of these combat set pieces where you fight the antagonist, and I mean this with absolutely no hyperbole. They are by far the worst pieces of forced combat in an ostensibly not combat game that I have ever played, and they make pretty much no sense. For context, these are just boxes of Norman's very own blood hanging around. How convenient. They say that his blood is being harvested or whatever when he's sleeping, but how it got transported to the hell dimension, all neatly packaged up and conveniently 50 feet away from him, we'll never know. Enemies are insanely tanky, you have no defensive options, and so you're forced to just face tank enemies for 5 days while your entire bloodstream is being replaced. They're forcing you to dig through the terrible cargo menus to do basically chores during combat, and they decided in their infinite wisdom to make melee an item that you have to equip, when switching weapons already feels like rummaging through a garbage bag, and you get to endure all of this for the experience of extremely subpar combat and a nothing story. I don't think this would bother me as much if I hadn't played Phantom Pain, as I have seen this exact same team do this before and at least 10 times better. This is so much worse. If there wasn't combat at all, it wouldn't be a problem. I would have liked if they had committed to a shift in focus, but because they kept combat, it kind of undermines everything. Like, you know the BTs that you're supposed to be scared of and were all over the marketing, the invisible baby guys? They immediately perish to "and grenade," and you can outpace them by speed walking. After I realized that, pretty much everything about the world fell apart. It's not just the set-piece combat that's bad, the world combat is bad in the complete opposite way, which is that it's far too easy. Practically right out of the gate, Norman Reedus gets handed the Bola gun, which might as well be Mjolnir. Enemy AI is far worse than MGS5 2. If Venom ran from a group of enemies at night, they'd fire mortars at his last known position, light up the sky with flares, call for reinforcements. Norman's enemies, on the other hand, run at him in an open field and get outranged by the most forgiving weapon since the Huntsman. I sure am glad to hear that Death Stranding 2 decided to lean even deeper into the awful combat with near identical set pieces. I bet that'll be just a joy to play. I don't really understand what the hell happened with Death Stranding, why its focus seems so all over the place, but it frustrates me. It could have been an excellent, incredibly innovative game about on-foot travel, but it's more like a case study of what happens when you get bogged down by your own previous work. Clinging to the aspects of MGS5 that they were working with kind of doomed the whole experience for me. Without the combat, without the extremely abundant resource system, with more scarcity and a protagonist that was actually present, Death Stranding could have been really gripping in all aspects instead of just in world building and in visuals. It leans on its undeniably striking imagery so hard that there's barely anything else to it. This is very important, so please don't run off to the comments before you hear this part. I don't want this video to come off as a rebuke of Death Stranding, necessarily, even though that was a lot of the video. I want it to be more a recommendation for Metal Gear Solid 5. I think Death Stranding has issues because by comparison it is astronomically worse than MGS5. You should play this game. It has been 10 years since it came out, it will run on everything, and it is very, very, very worth your time. It has an extremely fun sandbox with a story that is way above par for video game writing, and a surprisingly decent modding scene. I wholeheartedly recommend the Subsistence mod if you've already played the game before and want to give it a go under a harder rule set. If you really enjoyed the last few missions in the base game where they start you off with nothing, this makes the whole gameplay like that while letting enemies drop a way wider variety of stuff, and it's great. If you'll indulge me, my favorite aspect of Subsistence, aside from the wider variety of dropped items, is its twist on how default MGS5 works. Enemies get various gear depending on how you play, so if you go full guns blazing, they'll get PUBG armor, and if you do stealth infiltrations, they'll get NVGs. Usually this takes a few missions to set in, but the Subsistence mod resets this every mission, but makes it scale throughout that mission, so how you deal with one outpost will force your takedown of the next one to use different tactics. Anyway, I gotta go... Oh, wait. Very late addition to the script here. Kojima just announced like 2 games, and one of them is a next-generation espionage action game, which in English translates to Metal Gear spiritual successor. I don't think anyone else in the entire industry is calling their game an espionage action game. I guess that makes this MGS6? I have to admit, I hope they're changing the name. Fizzint sounds like a brand of gum rather than a video game. There's a lot of aspects in MGS5 that I'd want them to expand on, but that is way beyond the scope of this video. If enough people are interested in the comments, I could probably be convinced to make that into its own video, but I don't know how much more people want me to talk to them about Metal Gear. Especially given that I suspect the first comment on this video will be, "You missed this one detail in hour 5 of the cutscene compilation that dismantles your entire view on Norman Reedus' character. By the way, I've never actually played the game." Thanks to my patrons, Emmy and Potato especially. Like, comment, subscribe, you know the drill. And also... shoot quiet for me.